The mirror had become her quiet enemy. It hung across from her bed, framed in dust and time, reflecting a face she barely recognized. Each morning she caught her own reflection and turned away quickly, as though seeing a stranger. The woman in the glass was not the girl she remembered, not the mother who once bustled with energy, nor the wife who once smiled easily. Her hair, now silver, framed a face lined by years of worry and waiting. Her eyes still carried light, but it was softer now, dimmed perhaps by too many nights of loneliness. "When did I disappear?" she whispered to the empty room. She touched her cheek gently, tracing the map of her years. Every wrinkle, every mark told a story, but she could no longer see beauty in any of them. Time had taken her smoothness, her strength, her youth, and with them, her sense of worth. The mirror did not argue. It only reflected her silence. She turned it toward the wall that morning, unable to bear its honesty, and yet, somewhere deep within her heart, a quieter truth remained. Though she had forgotten it, heaven had not. Each day unfolded like the last, slow, careful, heavy, with repetition. She woke at the same hour, made the same cup of tea, and watched the same morning light spill through the same window. The rhythm was safe, but empty. She once had a life full of movement, caring for children, managing a home, serving her church. There had been meaning in every hour. But now, the hours passed quietly, unnoticed by anyone but her. There was no one left to cook for, no one to listen when she spoke. The silence had become her only companion. Sometimes she tried to fill it with noise, the radio, the hum of the old refrigerator, the sound of her own humming, but none of it reached the loneliness that sat deep in her bones. One afternoon she sat down and said aloud, "Lord, why am I still here?" Her voice cracked on the last word. The question hung in the air like smoke. There was no thunder, no answer, just the sound of her own breathing and the quiet ache of existing without reason. Still, she whispered a soft amen. Habit, perhaps, or faith too stubborn to die. She watched from her window as the world moved on without her. The neighbors came and went, young families busy, bright, full of plans. Cars rolled by, children's laughter floated through the air, and she sat with her tea unseen. She used to be part of all that motion once. There had been visits, conversations, invitations. Now weeks passed without anyone knocking on her door. The few who did spoke kindly but briefly, as if visiting her was a duty to be completed quickly before returning to real life. In the market, the cashier called her dear, but never met her eyes. At church, the young people greeted her politely, but no one sat beside her anymore. The world had grown louder, faster, brighter, and she had quietly faded into its background. Sometimes she wondered if this was what it meant to grow old, to become invisible. She smiled less, spoke less, dreamed less. The world did not seem to need her anymore, but in the unseen places of her heart, a voice, faint, hidden, but steady, whispered, "I still do." She didn't hear it yet, but she would. Her hands told her story better than any words could. They were thin now, veined and trembling, their strength long gone. But once, those hands had been full of life. They had cooked countless meals, tied shoelaces, comforted fevers, wiped tears. They had built a home, one of love and safety. Now, when she looked at them, they seemed to belong to someone else. She could no longer do the things that had once defined her. The garden had overgrown, the sewing machine gathered dust, the church choir went on without her voice. "What am I good for now?" she murmured one morning, staring at her open palms. They were still capable of gentle things, folding, praying, holding a cup. But she couldn't shake the feeling that their usefulness had ended. It was as though, when her strength faded, so did her purpose. She placed her hands in her lap and whispered, "Lord, I miss being needed." The room stayed silent. But if she had listened closely, she might have noticed that her hands, the same ones she called useless, were still trembling with life. He was not done with them yet. She had many thoughts, but few ever became words. The world around her was busy, and she feared her voice no longer mattered. When her children called, rarely, she told them she was fine, even when she wasn't. "Don't worry about me," she'd say with a smile they couldn't see through the phone. In truth, she longed to say what her heart carried. "I feel forgotten. I feel small. I feel like I don't belong anywhere anymore." But she swallowed those confessions, tucking them away like secrets too heavy to share. Sometimes, while washing dishes or folding a blanket, she would talk to God in fragments, half-thoughts, unfinished prayers. "I don't know if you still need me," she whispered once, "but I still need you." She waited for an answer, but none came, not in the way she hoped anyway. Yet even in the silence, something sacred lingered, a knowing, a listening presence that did not rush her sorrow or fill it with noise. She thought no one heard her, but heaven was quietly leaning in. It came slowly, not in one cruel moment, but in small, quiet lies that crept into her mind. "You're no use anymore. You've served your time. You're just waiting now." The words had no voice, yet she heard them clearly. She tried to push them away, but loneliness can make even lies sound like truth. Every small failure, the cup she dropped, the button she couldn't fasten, the steps that tired her too quickly, seemed to prove the point. She felt invisible not just to others, but to God. One evening she sat by the window and said aloud, "Maybe I don't matter anymore." The confession startled her. It felt too honest, too final. Tears welled in her eyes. She pressed her hand against her heart, whispering, "Forgive me, Lord, but I don't know who I am now." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying her words upward. The sky was already listening. For the first time, she didn't try to hide her pain. She let it spill, the doubts, the longing, the ache, and though she couldn't see it, the moment her tears fell, heaven began to move. The whisper that told her she was worthless was about to be silenced by a far greater voice, one that had never stopped calling her beloved. She used to pray every morning, long, detailed prayers filled with names, needs, and gratitude. But lately her words had thinned. Her voice, once steady, now faltered after only a few sentences. The ache in her knees made kneeling difficult, and her mind often wandered, chasing memories instead of hopes. Some days she sat in silence instead. "You already know everything, Lord," she would whisper. "So what can I tell you that you don't already see?" It wasn't rebellion, it was exhaustion. Her prayers had become fewer, not because she stopped believing, but because she felt unworthy of being heard. She wondered if perhaps her usefulness to heaven had faded too. Others were younger, stronger, able to serve, to teach, to help. What could she give now but her tears? Yet even that night, when she felt too small to pray, her sighs rose like incense. Heaven did not count her words, only her heart. And even in her silence, her name was being spoken in love. God does not forget the prayers we forget to say. One afternoon, while sorting through an old drawer, she found a photo album. The cover was cracked, the pages faded, but the images inside were still alive. Smiling faces, young and full of promise. Her wedding day, the birth of her first child. Christmas mornings filled with laughter. She ran her hand over each picture, tracing the outlines as though she could touch the memories themselves. For a moment, she could almost hear their voices again, her husband's laughter, her children's chatter, her own younger self singing as she cooked. The sound filled the room like music remembered from a dream. But then, as the light shifted, the ache returned. Those days were gone. The faces in the photographs had aged, moved away, built lives that no longer needed her. She closed the album and held it to her chest, whispering, "Was that when I mattered most?" Her heart ached, but something in her spirit stirred, a quiet reminder that her worth had never been tied to seasons or roles. She had been loved as a wife, as a mother, and still, even now, as simply herself. The shadows of the past faded as a gentler light began to take their place. That night, the weight of everything came to rest on her chest. The ache of lost youth, the silence of forgotten prayers, the memories that refused to fade. It all pressed down until she could barely breathe. She lay still, staring into the darkness, tears slipping quietly onto her pillow. She didn't fight them this time. There was no one to see, no reason to be strong. "Lord," she whispered between sobs. "I don't know why I'm still here. I don't know what you want from me." The only answer was the sound of her own crying, steady, soft, lonely, the kind of cry that empties a soul completely. She pressed her palms together weakly. "If I have any value left," she said, her voice shaking, "please, show me." Her words broke into silence, but it was not the same silence as before. Something shifted, barely perceptible but real. The air grew still, almost listening, and though she could not see it, that tear, that prayer, simple, raw, sincere, had reached the throne of mercy. Before the morning light returned, he had already decided she would know her worth again. It was just before dawn when she woke suddenly, unsure why. The room was still. No noise from outside, no wind at the window, no sound at all. And yet, something was different. The silence no longer felt empty. It was filled, alive, breathing, like a gentle presence had entered her small room. She sat up slowly, her hand gripping the blanket. The quiet seemed to hum softly, not in sound, but in feeling. And within that stillness, a voice rose, not from the air, but from deep inside her, where truth had always lived. "You are mine." The words were not spoken aloud, but they settled in her heart with such clarity that she gasped. Her tears began to flow before she understood why. The voice, warm, calm, familiar, continued, not with more words, but with love. It wasn't speaking to her ears, but to her being. For so long, she had believed her worth had faded with her years. But in that quiet moment she knew she was still seen, still chosen, still precious. She pressed her trembling hands to her chest, whispering, "Jesus, is that you?" The silence answered with peace, and she knew it was. Later that morning, she sat in her chair by the window, tears still drying on her cheeks. The world outside glowed with a softness she hadn't noticed before. The sunlight seemed warmer, the air lighter. But it wasn't the world that had changed, it was her heart. As she closed her eyes, she felt it again. That presence, not distant, not imagined, but close, tender, surrounding her like invisible arms. Then came the feeling, a warmth on her shoulder, as real as a human touch. She didn't move, she didn't question. The touch carried no words, only care, the kind of care that needs no explanation. In it, she felt everything she had been longing for: love, acceptance, belonging. Her body was frail, her hands still weak, but within her something strong began to rise. Her soul, once curled inward in pain, began to open like a flower to light, and she realized in awe she wasn't forgotten. She was being held. She whispered, "You found me, didn't you?" And though there was no voice in reply, the warmth deepened. She could almost hear his heart say, "I never lost you." Something shifted in her life after that morning. She could not explain it, not even to herself. Her steps remained slow, her body unchanged, but her spirit had been lifted. The heaviness that once clung to her had fallen away, replaced by a peace she could feel in every breath. Each morning now began not with sighs, but with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered before she rose from bed. "Thank you for still seeing me." Even her small routines, washing dishes, folding clothes, tending to her flowers, became acts of quiet worship. She no longer asked why she was still here. Instead, she asked how she might still serve. The answer came not in thunder, but in gentleness, love. She could feel it, his strength beneath her weakness, his joy flickering within her heart. It was as if Jesus himself had taken her soul by the hand and lifted it above the weight of years and loneliness. One afternoon, while the sun fell golden on her face, she smiled through tears and said aloud, "I'm still yours." And in that moment, she knew that truth was enough to keep her lifted for the rest of her days. Days later, she found herself standing again before the mirror she had once turned to the wall. For a moment she hesitated, her old fear whispering that she would only see the same tired face, the one lined with age and loss. but something deep inside urged her to look. Slowly she lifted her eyes. What she saw made her catch her breath. The wrinkles were still there, the silver hair unchanged, but her face looked different, softer, kinder, alive. The emptiness that had once stared back at her was gone. Her eyes shone with quiet light, as though someone else was looking out through them. She touched the glass lightly, smiling. "You're still here," she whispered, not to herself, but to the one who now lived within her heart. In that reflection, she saw not a woman fading away, but a soul restored, radiant with a beauty that time could not steal. It was not youth she saw, but grace. For years she had believed she was forgotten, unwanted, without value. But now, looking into her own eyes, she saw the reflection of a truth too great to ignore. She had always been beloved. Her hands still trembled, still bore the marks of time, but they no longer looked useless to her. Each line, each scar spoke of love given, work done, lives touched. She began to see them not as remnants of the past, but as tools of grace. Small, yes, but still able to serve. She began knitting again, not for herself but for others. Little scarves for children at church, small blankets for those in the hospital. Every stitch became a prayer, every thread an offering. "These hands can still give," she whispered as she worked. Maybe not much, but something. Soon her neighbors noticed. One young mother passing by stopped to thank her for a blanket she had left at her door. "It smells like peace," the woman said, smiling. The elderly woman laughed softly. "That's Jesus you smell," she replied, and she meant it, because in every act of small kindness she felt him working through her hands. The same hands that once trembled in doubt now moved in quiet confidence, serving again in love. Her purpose had not been lost, it had simply changed shape. As days passed, she began to sense something deeper, a gentle pull, a quiet calling. It wasn't a grand mission or a new beginning. It was something humbler, simpler. Be present, be kind, be light. She no longer needed titles or recognition. The world might still overlook her, but heaven did not. In the quiet of her heart, she knew her worth was not in what she could do, but in who she belonged to. Each morning she prayed, "Use me today, Lord, in whatever way you choose." Some days, that meant smiling at a stranger. Other days, it was sending a note to someone lonely, or simply sitting in silence, praying for a world she would never see. She had spent so many years believing her life's purpose was behind her. Now she realized it had simply been waiting for her heart to open again. She no longer asked what value she had. She knew her value was not in doing, but in being his. And in that quiet calling, she found joy deeper than anything she'd ever known. One soft morning, she heard a knock at her door, a sound so rare it startled her. When she opened it, a young woman stood there, holding a small basket of fruit and flowers. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," the visitor said shyly. "You helped my mother last winter. She told me to come and thank you." The elderly woman blinked in surprise. "Your mother?" she repeated. Then she remembered the small blanket she had left at a neighbor's doorstep, the one she had prayed over before folding. She hadn't expected it to be noticed, let alone remembered. She invited the young woman in, and as they sat together at the table, conversation flowed easily. The visitor spoke of her life, her worries, her faith that had grown thin. The older woman listened with warmth and understanding, her voice soft as she said, "He never leaves us, dear, even when we forget him." When the young woman left, tears of gratitude glistened in her eyes. "You don't know how much this meant," she said. After she was gone, the elderly woman sat for a long time, the faint scent of flowers still in the air. She smiled through tears. "So this is what it feels like to be used by you again," she thought. The house, once quiet and cold, now pulsed with quiet purpose. In the evenings, she had begun to hum again. At first, it was just habit, an old hymn remembered from years past, but soon the melodies returned to her like gentle waves, filling the spaces that silence had claimed. Her neighbors began to notice. One said, "I can hear you singing through the window. It makes the whole street feel peaceful." The elderly woman smiled, a little embarrassed, but inside her heart danced. Each song carried memory, lullabies she had once sung to her children, hymns she had whispered through tears, and even the wordless hums that rose naturally from gratitude. Her voice was thin now, but it carried something more beautiful than strength. It carried presence. Sometimes she stopped mid-song and simply listened. The stillness answered her, not with music, but with peace. She felt as though heaven was harmonizing with her, one quiet soul joining the choir of the unseen. Her life had become a song again, not loud or perfect, but true, and in that truth she felt alive. As weeks turned into months, those around her began to notice a change. She had not grown younger, nor had her body grown stronger, but her presence carried something radiant, a calmness that lingered long after one had spoken with her. When people came to her home, they often said they felt lighter when they left. Children lingered on her porch, listening to her stories. Neighbors came seeking comfort without knowing why. It was as though light had settled upon her, and everywhere she went it followed. She never claimed it as her own. "It's not me," she would say with a soft smile. "It's Jesus. He's the light. I just carry the reflection." In her solitude, she had once felt invisible. Now she had become a lantern, quietly glowing in the dimness of the world. The years that had once felt wasted now shone with meaning. And each night before she slept, she whispered, "Thank you for letting me shine, even when I thought I was broken." Heaven heard, and the light around her grew a little brighter. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through her lace curtains, she sat with her journal open before her. The pages were filled with years of thoughts, prayers, and quiet observations, words that had once felt heavy, but now read like testimonies of grace. She began writing again, not about sorrow but gratitude. "Lord," she wrote, "I once believed my value was gone, that my time had passed, but you have shown me that every breath has meaning when it is yours. My hands, my voice, my days, they still belong to you. That is enough." Her writing was slow, her letters uneven, but her heart was steady. She no longer measured her worth by what she could do, but by the one who had lifted her. Later that day, she gathered a few of her knitted blankets and notes of encouragement, leaving them in a small basket by her gate with a sign, "Take one if you need comfort. Jesus cares for you." By evening, the basket was empty. She smiled as she sat by her window, watching the sunset melt into gold. The greatest gift she had left to give was not what she made. It was who she had become, a vessel of love, a quiet reflection of divine kindness. Her life, once shadowed by doubt, now shimmered with purpose. The night came softly, without fear. She sat in her chair by the window, her Bible open on her lap, her heart at peace. The air was still, filled with the kind of silence that feels holy. Her breath was slow, her thoughts calm, as though her soul already knew what was coming. She whispered one last prayer, her voice tender and sure. "Thank you, Lord, for lifting me when I could no longer lift myself. I was nothing without you, but in you I found everything." A gentle warmth filled the room, not a flash, not a vision, but a presence. The same presence that had called her name in the silence, that had touched her shoulder in the dark, that had turned her sorrow into light. Her eyes fluttered closed. There was no struggle, no pain, only peace. It felt as though loving hands were cradling her soul, carrying it upward, free of all heaviness. The house grew still, but it did not feel empty. Something holy lingered, a quiet joy, a warmth that remained. The woman who once thought she had no value had been lifted fully, body to rest, soul to glory. And heaven, gentle and radiant, received her like an old friend coming home.